Well,
Hello,
hello, hello.
hello, hello.
Welcome back to another insightful conversation. So, hello, everybody. I'm Leanne.
And I am Jason, and this is Let's Talk.
This is a space where no topic is off limits. We are going to cover things from well-being and resilience, leadership, money, relationships, mindset, and so much more.
Here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real stories, and honest conversations. Because really, at the end of the day, the things we don't often talk about are really the things we end up need to be talk about the most and matter the most.
Yeah. And our goal here is simple. It's to spark new ideas, to shift your mindsets, and to give you practical tools that you can use in your life and in your leadership.
So, whether you're tuning in today for just inspiration, growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk. Well, welcome back to the neuroscience of being human, which is what this series is all about. And today, specifically, we're talking about something that impacts every area of our lives. It really does. And that is how we make decisions. And I don't know about you, but decisions can be a minefield for many. So, more specifically today, we're going to talk about how we often think and about where we can actually be more rational, because we think we're being rational when we're making decisions, but oftentimes we're actually not. And so, this episode, we're going to do a deep dive into the conversation around bias, cognitive bias that can kick in. Because if you have a brain, you have bias. And that's the truth of it. But most of us don't like to think about it like that. And because your brain is constantly taking shortcuts, most of them are unconscious. So bias kind of kicks in, it's under our conscious awareness, and yet it impacts everything that we do. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today, Jason.
Absolutely. And me too, Leanne. And, first off, um, there's this myth of being a rational human, right? So we often like to believe we think first and feel second. But according to neuroscience, it tells us just the opposite of that. We feel first, then we justify. So, to explain a little bit about this, right? So, the brain likes to be predictive. So, it's just not reacting to the world out there, it's actually constantly anticipating what will happen next. So it's actively making educated guesses based on, your past experiences, stored memories, emotional patterns, contextual clues, and your current goals.
Mm.
It also likes to fill gaps quickly. Um, and, as we've talked in other episodes, it prefers certainty. That our brain is constantly looking how to keep us safe and living. And it's also loves to conserve energy. So your brain is not built for accuracy, but more so it's built for efficiency. And with inefficiency, it creates bias.
Mm.
And we all have it. I mean, it's so interesting how, and I'm sure you've heard this too, Leanne, many, many times where, you're in conversation with different individuals and they're like, oh, I don't have any biases. I'm not biased. We're all biased.
Yeah.
Sorry to break the news to you folks. We are we have those efficient, or we have brains that like to be efficient. And within that, it creates bias, but it's the awareness around that self awareness to be like, you know what, my bias might be at play here,
Mm.
and to name it and to put it out there. So, with that, I will hand it over to you, Leanne.
Yeah. And the thing with bias, as you said, right, like it shows up all the time because the cognitive bias is a mental shortcut that helps us and allows us to process information quickly, but it's not always accurate. And the thing that I find fascinating with this conversation is that we can see bias in other people very easily, but we don't see it in ourselves, right? Like we just don't.
Gotta love that blind spot, right?
It's definitely a blind spot, but you can see it in others. If others are being biased, we can actually see it in them, but we just don't see it in us. So let's have a little bit of a breakdown about some of the key biases that kick in for us when we're looking at making decisions. And I think it's really important that we understand this, because then we can kind of circumnavigate, right? We can actually put strategies in place to at least, even if we can't see it, we might be able to adapt our processing style so we can navigate the bias that might be kicking in. So the first bias that I want to talk about is confirmation bias. And you see this one happening all the time, and I know I do it. It's where we look for information that actually supports what we already believe. So we're not actually looking to make it a decision that's useful. We're making a decision, or we're looking for information to confirm what we already want. And I saw this happen just in my own world this week, where I asked multiple people a question and sourcing the answer that I wanted to correspond with the decision that I wanted to make, right? So we're looking all the time for information to confirm what we already think, as opposed to being objective and making a decision that might be more useful or more realistic, shall we say. So that's confirmation bias. We're trying to confirm the information we already have. And again,
can I just put one little quick example in there?
Please.
So when you were talking about that, what it reminded me of is the current state of where we're at in our world, with all the volatility, political divide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think confirmation has been on confirmation bias overload.
Yeah.
Over the vast amount of recent time. So I just wanted to put that example because I think that's a pivotal example of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Because I see it all the time, and I see it in myself too, looking for information that supports what I believe,
yeah,
and to make it true. So yeah. I just wanted to put that double click in there.
And if we even take that one step further, now that you've brought that in, isn't that what all the algorithms are doing? Right? It's feeding confirmation bias, right? Like, because I don't know about you, but you click on one thing and then all of a sudden that's what you get more and more and more of. And it's confirming the same story that you're looking for, or what have you, or that you've researched. Or so I think all the algorithms really are based on confirmation bias, where it feeds us the information that we're already attached to and then confirming same.
Absolutely. Our devices do listen to us.
Yeah, all the time, all the time. So confirmation bias, be aware, be very aware. The next one that I wanted to talk about is this negativity bias too. And this one is where we notice threats more than the positives. So we actually are constantly looking for the threat in the environment in order to keep us safe and alive. It's our brain's, again, natural shortcut. It's the thing that it's designed to do. But what it does, it stops us from making powerful decisions where because we're looking at the risk more than the reward. And it can get in the way of really good decisions in the future, because we're much more inclined to make decisions based on what's safe now, as opposed to what could be more rewarding in the future. And if we think about that in a lot of the decisions that we're making, how much does it get in the way where you watch people or organizations even keep doing the same thing because it's noticing threats potentially, but not necessarily noticing the rewards or the positive bits. So this negativity bias kicks in. And for me, I really fight against this one because I'm the eternal optimist. So I'm always looking for the positives. But I know that most of the people around me are not, right? So and it's where people can butt heads a lot in this particular bias around decision making, because some people just want to be safe and just want to make sure that there's no threat in the environment, whereas others might be looking more towards, okay, well, what's positive? What could be good about this? What's useful? So I think it's another one that can kind of kick in and give us a little bit of grief.
Yeah.
The next one that I want to talk about is availability bias. And this is um, where we judge probability based on what comes easily to mind or the last bit of information that we heard. So we might read something yesterday and all of a sudden we're going to make decisions based on that because of the availability, like it's front of mind, as opposed to actually lifting the veil, having a look at everything, making sure you leave no stone unturned. So availability bias kicks in because it's the most recent information or the information that I can come to very easily, as opposed to actually doing deep research and making sure that you're looking at all the avenues, not just what comes to hand naturally or most recent. So this one kicks in all the time as well and can really impact decision making, especially around hires, right? So it might be the most available information. It might be the one that lives the closest. It might be the one that that we interviewed last, and that's the most recent memory that we have. So availability bias can really kick in and again inhibit some of our decisions. The next one also that I want to talk about, and this one is really important, I think, it's similarity bias or the halo effect, they often call it, where we assume that one positive trait means everything is positive, or I know this person and they did good in the last job, so I know they'll do good in this job, regardless of what their skill case might be. It also shows up where people that are like me, I feel they're smarter, right? And I'm much more inclined to lean into that than people that are different to me. And I've mentioned this before, but in Australia, you can see grown-ass men actually wear their school tie to job interviews because of similarity bias. Because if the employer went to the same school and they notice my tie, I'm much more inclined, or they're going to be much more inclined to give me the job, regardless of what my skill set is, just because of that similarity bias. And yeah, it's an interesting one, this one, because we assume the best of people based on one trait, even though there might be 25 traits that aren't necessarily good, right?
Yeah.
But because of the halo effect, and because we'll project that goodness onto everything, we don't actually see the complete picture of the person that's in front of us.
Yeah, I see that a lot here in the US with like, especially Ivy League universities. It's like you have that on your resume or your CV, you automatically get an interview.
Yeah.
Because it's that similarity, it's that commonality, all that kind of stuff. And I would say that some universities, some prestigious universities are better at that than others as far as like within their like alumni. So it was interesting when you said that about the tie. It made me think that that happens a lot, with different Ivy League universities, depending if it's West Coast, East Coast, Middle America, et cetera. So
Yeah. Yeah. And like I say, it happens a lot in Australia as well, right? Where we're much more inclined to employ somebody just because they went to the same school or the cultural background. Like my family are Maltese. And if I meet somebody in the street that's Maltese, they're instantly my friend, even though I don't know anything about them. Like they could be ex-murderers for all I know, but because we've come from the same cultural background, we're instantly, we're tight. So it's really interesting when this one kicks in, but especially when we're looking at people decisions, right? This one is a really big one that we need to navigate. And and if we can, we've got to take the effects of this particular bias out of the mix. Have I shared the example, Jason, about the symphony orchestra that wanted to employ more females in their mix? Okay.
no.
I must have shared it in the training room last week because it's availability bias. It's come to mind. But there was, I think it's the Boston Symphony Orchestra decided that they wanted more females. It was predominantly a male dominated orchestra. So they decided that they're going to do interviews, but because of similarity bias, they thought, okay, we're going to beat it and we're going to do blind interviews. So we're going to have our backs turned like The Voice or like one of these shows. We're going to listen to them play music and then we'll make a decision based on their merit as opposed to their gender. But what they didn't account for was the clickety clack of the heels on the floor. So even though their intention was to hire more females, their bias kicked in and they still chose more male performers because they could hear the shoes of the clickety clack on the stage floor. So they decided to take it one step further and they got all attendees to remove their shoes, right? So everybody had to walk in barefoot. They still did the blind audition. They still had their backs to them. But what they found was that they picked, I think it was something like 55% more female orchestra members based on the fact now, because I'm only hearing what you're playing and not the shoes and not the gender that I see with my physical eyes. So we can, unfortunately, with bias, we can't take it out of people. It's so natural and inherent in us, but we can take it out of processes and systems to support us to make better choices. So I thought that was a really interesting one to share about that similarity bias, because even if our intent is to be more diverse in our choosing, the little sound of high heel shoes or shoes on the floor can actually still get in the way
Absolutely.
of our choosing. So I think that's a really interesting one. And then the last one I want to talk about is the sunk cost fallacy. And this one I find interesting as well. It's where we will continue doing something based on the investment we've already made. So we literally throw good money after bad, and we won't give up on something that we've already invested in. So just to give you an example of this, I went to watch a movie recently and it was seriously snooze-worthy. It was one of the worst movies I've seen in a very long time. But because I had invested in the ticket, I stayed through the whole movie. Never going to get that time back in my life, which but because I spent the money on the ticket, I sat through it. And you see this one show up where we might have a system that we've invested in heavily in an organization, and the system doesn't work, yet we keep investing money and keep patching and keep adding to and keep doing stuff to try and make it work because we've invested so heavily in relation to it. This one can also show up in relationships. I'm going to stay with the devil I know rather than leave because I've invested so many years of my life in this relationship. And at some point, it's going to get good, right? So I'll waste another 5 years in a relationship with somebody who actually isn't great for me and hoping that it will get better. So you can see these biases kick in the way that we make decisions, in the way that we live our life, in the way that we show up in the world. So bias isn't stupidity. It's not because we're silly that we stay in these relationships. It's not because we're silly that we, will choose someone based on a tie, or, that will keep investing money at good after bad or use the most recent information. It's not stupidity, it's survival, it's efficiency, it's what our brain is designed to do. But in modern life, these shortcuts can really distort our reality. And it can distort the decisions we make, and it can distort the efficiency or the effectiveness of how we show up in the world. And I think we need to be so mindful about this when we're making decisions, because like you said right at the beginning, we can think we're rational, but we're actually not being rational. We're being robotic around our biases.
Absolutely. I think it was it last week's episode or the week before where it says we are mostly emotional human beings that sometimes think rationally.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. Yet we think that we're rational beings who sometimes have emotions, right? It's so not the way.
Absolutely. Which, I think delves really good into this next area that we'll talk about is around emotion and decision making. And to start off, let's connect back to the emotion center here. And I think that reflection that I back from either last week or the week before's episode is that we are emotional beings that sometimes think rationally, because emotion is not separate from decision making. It actually, at the end of the day, drives it. And I think if that's something that we can come to, for lack of a better word, terms with, I think actually we will use our emotional intelligence better to make the decisions that need to be made, either in real time, or whatever the time cadence is that those decisions need to be made.
Can I,
So
just before you go into this, Jason, the other thing that I want to say is that we've only listed 5 or 6 biases here. But the truth is, there's 150 of them that get in the way, and they're all emotional based, right? Yeah. So if we really dig deep, there is so much more that gets in the way. And it's all based on shortcuts, conservation of our energy, and our emotional state.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we love embedding this neuroscience and this emotional intelligence, into almost everything that we talk about. It may not be super explicit, but there, it's always running, in the background.
That's our bias.
Exactly. We have an EQ bias.
Oh dear.
But I'd rather have that bias than some other ones. So before we get into some examples and such, I want to talk a little bit about the theory around this. And the theory in the neuroscience is called the somatic marker hypothesis. And it was developed by Dr. Antonio Damasio, who is a university professor, also the David Dornsife Professor of Neuroscience, also professor of psychology, philosophy, and neurology, and is also the director of the Brain and Creativity Institute at the University of Southern California here in Los Angeles. Put that all on one business card.
It needs to be this big.
This big, right? And what this theory suggests is that when we make decisions, we just don't think, we feel. And what happens is that our brain tags past experiences with emotional signals. And when we face a similar situation, the body responds before the mind does. That's what we call a gut feeling.
Our intuition.
Intuition, exactly. And it's interesting because, just, and even people with not a lot of, knowledge in neuroscience or EQ and all that, you do hear a lot, well, what is your gut saying? What is your intuition saying? So it's a natural part of your being, but when you know more about it and that awareness becomes so much deeper, it's amazing how it can actually act like this magician or this magic that's helping you steward forward in your decision making. So the question here isn't whether we use emotion in decision making, because you do. The question is whether you are aware of it. And I think that goes well with what we were just saying, is that when you have this deeper awareness, it's amazing on how much it can guide you to make better decisions, more sound decisions, more emotionally mature decisions at the end of the day, right? And and it goes back to making decisions based on that listening to understand versus making decisions on your reaction, where you just want to versus let me take that in, then make a decision. So with this, when you face a decision, your brain does certain things. Like I said earlier, it scans for past similar experiences, because that, is hardwired into your brain. Whether those experiences ended up good bad, somewhere in the middle, but it scans for those because it's familiar. It also activates your emotional memory. What was the emotion around that decision or that experience? Because it's familiar, right? And it also produces a subtle body signal. And it uses that signal to bias your decision. So bias is, a part of everything. And, like Leeanne just said, we only listed 5 or 6 that she talked about and we gave examples of, but there's that, 150, 156.
Yep.
So, a lot of this, and would you say, Leeanne, that a lot of the biases kind of operate in your subconscious?
Oh, absolutely. It's below our conscious awareness.
Yeah.
We're not aware that they're happening. We assume we're being rational, but we're actually not because it is so much below our conscious awareness. So we don't see it in ourselves, which is really unfortunate because we can see it in others, but not in ourselves. And we can call it out in others, but not in ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like sometimes it may, the bias may not even come out verbally. It may actually come out through body language. And, like calling out, like if somebody said something verbally, like, I mean, I can call out body language, be like, your body language shifted there.
Yeah.
Why? You know?
Yeah.
Um, and that happens within our own selves too. And we're not even aware of it. So, but I think sometimes when you have a deeper level of self-awareness and EQ, you can notice things a little bit quicker than if you didn't have, even within your own self, versus if you didn't have that.
Yeah. And if I can just double click on this whole gut
Yeah.
reaction thing that you're talking about, because we do get those body signals, right? We get a somatic event that occurs in our body, and that can be positive or negative. And is it
Mm-hmm.
actually, does it have anything to do with the decision I'm making now? The truth is, no, it doesn't. It has everything to do with our past history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet then we're basing today's decision on past data that's coming into the field. Um, and I'm not saying that gut instinct isn't good. Like a lot of us need to make quick decisions, expedience bias, right? It needs to be quick. We don't want to do all the research. We've got to decide quickly, especially in the workplace. So we rely on our gut instincts. We rely on our past experiences to inform our decisions of today. And to some level, that's great. But sometimes we've got to dig a bit deeper because we're not actually doing the research, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we're making decisions based on past experiences, which isn't always useful in today's decision that we need to make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, goes back to what we've said in many episodes, it's the inside job.
Mm-hmm. It's always an inside job.
Always, always, always. Um, and so Dr. Damasio, who developed this theory, he studied patients who had a damage to their ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Say that 10 times fast. And what was fascinating within his study is that the patient's IQs remained normal, their logic remained intact, and they could explain the pros and the cons perfectly. But they also struggled to make even simple decisions that would, and they also analyzed endlessly, unable to choose something very easily. And why did this happen? Because they had lost access to their emotional gut signals, that gut instinct, that intuition. So it's fascinating even just to like talk about this because it's like, because I didn't know much about this actual theory, until we were like planning for this episode. But it was like turned on all these lights, within me. Is like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and that makes sense, and that makes sense, and that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, oh, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say it's a fascinating study because the ventral medial and the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is it's what allows us to inhibit our behaviors. It is the emotional storehouse basically
Mm-hmm.
in the brain. And when that region is damaged, as you've said, I can still logic, I still have my IQ, I still have my reasoning, but I don't have the emotional backing to it, which gets in the way of all decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that came out from this study is, which is incredibly profound, is that without emotion, your decision making capability collapses,
Yeah.
which is fascinating just to think about. I mean, we could have a whole conversation just on that. So I will turn it over to you now to talk about bias in the real life of a human.
Yeah. But I just wanted to double click on that one as well, Jason, because without emotion, decision making collapses. And yet we're always told, put your emotions aside, right? Leave your emotions at the door. Don't bring your emotions into the workplace. Like we're always told that emotions are bad, bad, naughty, bad, and that we that we shouldn't be emotional. But actually, we're incapable of making decisions without them.
Yep.
And so the question isn't really that we can't have emotion. The question is, how are my emotions driving my decisions? Right? Because we can't take emotion out of the mix. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to decide. But how are they driving it? And am I making reasonable decisions or am I making decisions based on,
Mm-hmm.
the stories of the past, which are no longer serving me now? And to a degree, we need that to come in so we can kind of make a decision. But then we also need to ask, is this the best decision in today's
Yeah.
moment with the past history that's coming in? Or can I lean into a bit of discomfort and make a better decision now, even though it might not be, um, it might not be the decision that I would have made before, just
Right.
given the information that I have to hand now. So one of the things that I often say to people is slow down and do the research, like
Mm-hmm.
really, because our emotions are driving everything. And as we've established, without that, we can't make any decision at all. But the question again is, are we making an informed decision for today?
Yeah. And exactly. And I think we're within that, right? So, like with this new sphere of artificial intelligence, right? Is that you can actually use artificial intelligence to a positive benefit because maybe what you're feeling, right? And and a decision that you have to make, maybe you can double check it and ask, chat GPT or Claude. I mean, the variety of AI is out there is amazing, but just, you can double check, your what you're thinking and set the context and see what ChatGPT says. And, so it's, there's this fear that like, oh my gosh, like artificial intelligence is going to take over everything. It probably will in some things. And also use it as your co-pilot, use it as your like research assistant, use it as that entity to bounce things off of, because sometimes it can, you know, ping back because it's not thinking through emotion, right? So it can actually help to counterbalance maybe what you're feeling and the emotions that are being brought up from the past to help make a more sound decision.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that because I was sharing with somebody yesterday. I did deep work with Chat Chat. I call my AI Chat Chat last week, where I received some information, an email, and I had to respond to it. But I could feel the emotional weight of this decision that I had to make. And So I threw, I was working with Chat and I'm like, okay, this is the story, this is the history, this is the decision that I need to make now. Ask me questions so I can make sure that I'm making an informed decision based on now, not based on my past stories or whatever the case may be. Holy dooly, can I tell you, talk about deep work. Like the questions that Chat asked me was phenomenal. And I had to be honest in my responses, right? Like that's the other thing, because if we're not honest in our responses, then we're just going to keep making the same habitual decisions over and over again. But by the end of my 15 minutes of working with ChatGPT, I made probably the best decision that I've made in my life without all the emotional baggage that comes in. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes when I make a decision, like it can take me a while to work through the fors and the against, and I call it twist in the wind, right? Like you can spin around and round and round trying to make a decision. And then once you've made it and you've officiated that decision, then you can get into, oh shit, did I make the right decision, right? And you can still oscillate between, all the points, and you could waste so much energy on that. And I found that by using Chat, I made the decision. It was my decision. Chat didn't make it for me, but it asked me a whole range of fantastic questions, which meant that I was looking at this decision from multiple perspectives, and not just getting caught up in the emotion of it, right? Which was really useful. So I made the decision and I was able to then put it down. I didn't have to pick it up and rethink about it. Like I had this kind of freedom after that around, I know that the decision was a robust, well thought out decision based on today, not based on all the rest of it. So it's interesting that we can use these AI things to help us to make better decisions, more informed decisions, to ask us the questions, to make sure that we're looking at it from multiple perspectives and leaving no stone unturned, right? We're not expediting the decision and just making a quick rash decision and then having decision regret later, which I have done. I have done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So let's have a look at things that we have to face in real life where decision making kicks in and where we could do it better. And the first one is in our leadership roles when we're potentially hiring people, and we've got this similarity bias kicking in or hiring bias is another thing that they call it, because when this happens, we believe that we're actually evaluating people objectively. But the truth is, we're actually being influenced by our unconscious preferences all the time. So we have preferred candidates from similar universities that we've all already spoken about, or from cultural backgrounds, or based on their confidence as opposed to their actual competence. So somebody can walk in and, be all confident, but actually, did they have the skills, right? Or am I just seeing the competence or the confidence instead of that competence level? Are we actually looking at the merit? We allow that first impression to anchor the entire evaluation. And, first impression, good or bad.
Yeah. What came up for me just as a little like another little gold nugget in the hiring bias is I've seen a lot of language bias come into, or communication bias, and having worked most of my professional career in healthcare, I saw it all the time in both clinical settings, non-clinical settings. So that communication language bias is actually much more prevalent in hiring than I think what people realize.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. It's so interesting, right? Because we allow that to kick in and that colors everything, right? The entire process, like we're not even looking outside of that. So we need to make sure that we're, again, putting in systems and strategies to alleviate that, because we can't take it out of the person, the hiring person. which is why oftentimes you have a panel of people, but even that can get a bit tricky. If you're all similar, you'll still look for people that are similar to you, right?
Well, and I think too, if it's not thought through, like a lot of times there's panel bias too on
Mm,
how the panel is developed,
yep,
you know, depending on like who like the end hiring individual, whoever has that final decision, there's a lot of bias that goes into and I know we've both seen it in our professional careers, goes into making up panels.
yep,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, one of the things that you can do is make sure that you actually have panels that are not even closely related from completely different departments that aren't even going to be influenced or impacted by the new hire. Then
Yeah.
you've got a better choice or a better chance of eliminating this bias, right? Like truly, the
Yes.
things that we need to do. So just to bring the neuroscience flavor to this, as we always do, the brain makes rapid, thin slice judgment within seconds. Like it happens so quickly that we're not aware of it. And the amygdala, which is looking for pattern recognition all the time, like it's scanning for familiarity, for safety. That's what the system is designed to do, to keep us safe. So what can feel like a gut instinct can actually be comfort, familiarity. It can actually be, this unconscious cultural programming that we have.
Mhm.
So as a leader, we have to often think about hiring based on merit, not hiring based on familiarity, um, because we are going to make assumptions under pressure, right?
Mhm.
Like we just do. And when we're stressed, our cognitive flexibility drops, as we know, because our prefrontal cortex kind of goes offline and our ability to see the nuances disappears.
Mhm.
So we're making these snap judgments, and which increases bias, right? Like we know that. And in order to make sure that we're making decisions well, we really need to slow the process down, because bias kicks in even more so when we're under pressure, time or um, especially time pressure. But, we've got so much pressure coming in all the time that our survival brain takes over and we misinterpret things, as, and I'm sure we've all been there where we're under pressure and somebody says something and all of a sudden we're misinterpreting their tone. We assume their intention. We personalize what they're saying. Like these are all things that we do, but under normal circumstances, it wouldn't happen. So stress in itself amplifies the bias that we have in our brain. So if I can give you just something to think about, like pressure doesn't relieve your best thinking or reveal your best thinking. It actually reveals your fastest thinking, and your fastest thinking is bias prone. It just is. So we need
Yeah.
to slow the farm down.
Yes. And I think, one other thing, because as you were talking about that, Leanne, I mean, what really came to mind for me also was this whole area of well-being, right? Like if you're not taking care of your well-being, it's going to affect, you know, making decisions and, with less emotional intelligence, not thinking through, if you're tired, you're not well hydrated, you're not well exercised, etc. So I think there's a direct correlation here with well-being.
Mm,
So, if you're listening today or when you can, and you haven't seen our first series, go back and take, some glimpses through that because there's some really good well-being tips and tricks that in a vast number of areas of well-being that Leanne and I talked about that could actually help you just overall, but will have an insurmountable effect on this decision-making area of life.
yeah, absolutely. Because if we're not at our best physically, emotionally, and cognitively, it's going to affect every decision we make.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one, so in leadership, we need to be mindful, right? decisions around money. Like a lot of us have got to make decisions around money, right? And what we know about this particular part of our life is that loss feels twice as strong as gains. So if we lose something, we're going to feel that twice as much versus if we gain something, right? That negative bias kicks in again around this one. So if we lose $1,000 or $1,000, it's going to feel a lot stronger than how good it feels if we gain $1,000. Like we might be excited a little bit, but if we lose it, how long does that stay with us for, right? Like it feels heavier. And we hold on to these kind of bad investments or these losses for way too long. This is where that sunk cost fallacy kicks in, where we keep throwing good after bad in the hope of fixing it, right? We can hold on to bad investments for too long. We avoid opportunities that feel risky, even when they might be rationally sound and the better decision, but because of the risk, we're not going to make it because your brain would rather avoid loss than pursue growth or to pursue reward. So listen to that. It would rather avoid loss than to pursue anything good, right? This is this risk overestimation that we have where the brain exaggerates rare threats, dramatic events, uncertainty, pain, like it exaggerates that. And especially if they were recent, our emotional ability is charged, right? And if you think about what's going on in the world right now with this, all the stuff that's going on in the media, right? And the frequency at which this information is coming at us, we're going to be making more risk adverse decisions right now because this availability bias of the information coming in and our threat detection is going off the Richter, right? So, and if we've made one bad financial decision in our lives, that colors future decisions, as we've already established, because that emotional contagion kicks in and it shapes all future decisions. So we have to remember that the brain remembers dramatic events, not strategies. It remembers the things that felt awful, not reality. And we're going to consistently make fear-based decisions, especially around our financial decisions, because this is where our nervous system feels unsafe. And then we get into the habit of like, we're not looking at bank accounts. We're not actually looking at information. We're not doing the research and we delay investing. We delay making decisions around this, which has us stay small, right? And that's not what we want to have. And that's not financial literacy. It's actually an emotional threat response. So financial decisions can really trigger a big response in us because we base our worth internally on our financial worth. So financial decisions are rarely just logical. They are absolutely emotional, and they're based on safety because it does activate that wiring, which is a fear-based response, and we need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, when you were talking about this, Leeanne, what it made me think of our episode last week on the social brain, how like physical pain and social pain activate the same area of the brain, but it's like that physical pain we may feel for a day 2, 3, but it's that social pain that we hold on to that just is that residue that
emotional
like,
contamination.
exactly. So when you were talking about how like we hold on to those bad investment decisions, et cetera, it made me think about the examples that we were talking about last week with the social brain and how that physical pain and that social pain kind of like act in the same way, but in a different context.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because our brain can't tell the difference between reality and a story. And between something that's happened now and something that we're remembering from the past, right? Like we think we have all of this skill set and we
Right. Well, I mean, it's like interesting, right? Where you gave the example where you were in the training room and you slipped and fell and your dress went over your head. I mean, it made me think. I was like, well, like now when Leanne's in a training room, does she avoid wearing dresses?
Yeah, I do. I always wear pants. Unconsciously.
Unconsciously, exactly.
Unconsciously, right? Um, but now that you've brought that up, you've brought that to my conscious awareness. So now I'm going to have to look at that. So I don't know whether to say thank you or to you, Jason.
Right. It could be a both and, depend on the day, right?
Right. It's like, good thinking, 99. So this is what I mean, where things that shape our future based on something, which is interesting. The other one that I want to talk about that I think impacts all of our lives here, Jason, is around relationships, right? Because our relationships are completely rife with bias. We can mind read. We think we can mind read. I'll say that again. We think we can mind read because we can assume that we can think we know what people are thinking or what somebody else is thinking. And to give you an example, I don't know if you've read the book, The Four Agreements, but there's a line in the book that talks about people don't give offense, we take it. And I think that's so powerful because um, we make up stories based on what somebody does. So somebody might not have, replied to an email. So that must mean that they're upset with us. Somebody might not respond the way that we think they should. We think they should. So we make up a story about. So we kind of project this mind reading phenomenon onto other people, and it's so not right. Like we don't know
Mm-hmm.
what's going on for them. We just think we know. And then we believe our story over their truth because they might say, no, that wasn't what happened. And we'll go, yes, it was. Like, have you ever had an
Yeah.
argument with somebody,
Yeah.
your significant other, where they're telling you, no, this is actually what happened. And you're going, no, you're wrong because I'm going to project my story on top of you. So it's really quite interesting. We assume that if somebody's quiet, they might be judging us or they don't like us. We might assume a whole range of things because the brain really hates uncertainty. So it fills the gap. And in the absence of the truth, we will make up a story. And the sad part is we will then believe our story over the truth. And I think that's the thing that we need to be mindful of. Because what we fill the gap with is usually based on fear, it's based on past experiences, as we know. We attachment to particular patterns that we like that make us feel safe. So
Mm-hmm.
the brain prefers a painful story over a no story at all
Yeah.
because it can't handle the ambiguity, right? So we'll fill it with something, even though the something actually feels yucky. And then we add fuel to the fire. We build on that story, right? So something will happen, we'll make up a story, and then we'll add more information to that to make it even bigger than it actually is. Because the brain constructs narratives all the time. So one small event can become a raging inferno inside of our mind, um, which is so, uh, it really limits our ability to be able to connect with those around us, right? Because of this irrational fear that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So they might have forgotten to do something. We instantly take that as, they forgot, they don't care, I'm not that important, this always happens, right? Like it expands into something that's an inferno where really they might have just forgotten. Like that's it. They've had something else on their mind, but the narrative and the story that we will then attach to that, especially in our intimate relationships with those that are closest to us, because our emotion narrows our perception, right? And it blinds us in so many ways. So then we just follow the dots. This then means this. They forgot. They don't love me. I'm not important. The world is going to end. Like it kind of goes in this. Um, and the other thing that I find really fascinating in this space is that we judge ourselves based on our intention, but we judge others based on their action and behavior. So just to, somebody might say something to me and I will based on their behavior, that was not appropriate. How dare you do that? But if I did the same behavior, I would then say, actually, that wasn't my intent. So we kind of give ourselves the grace of intent, but we judge others on their behavior. We don't give them the grace of what their intent might be. We're not even actually that interested because the behavior speaks volumes, you know? So if I was rude to somebody, I would say, I'm so sorry I was rude. That wasn't my intent. I was just stressed out. But if
Mm-hmm.
somebody's rude to me, I wouldn't give them the same courtesy. I would just go, well, that was bloody rude, right? So we overestimate their personality or overestimate what they're doing, and we underestimate what we're doing based on intent versus behavior. So the truth about this is that we don't actually see the world as it is. We see it as we are. We see it through our own lenses and how we're all of this sort of stuff. So bias isn't about being flawed, it's about being human. And the goal isn't to eliminate bias because we need it for our mental shortcuts, because otherwise we would be fatigued every day. It's impossible to eliminate it. But the goal is awareness, because with awareness, we can create space. And then in that space, we can make wiser choices, less biased choices.
Yeah.
And if we slow things down, it's so important. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
kind of really highlight that, especially in our personal relationships, because we judge so many people by their behavior, not by their intent. And if we were kind enough to say, hey, what did you actually mean there? Share that with me. We'd probably have far less interpersonal conflicts in the workplace and in the home.
Absolutely. And it makes me think that like human resources department should be renamed like to human behavior departments or
Yes, absolutely.
because it's like I mean honestly when you look at it, the type of things that go to I always call there's like the good side of HR, there's the bad side of HR, right?
Yeah.
I would say like the things that go to this bad side of HR, it's all human behavior.
Always.
Yeah.
And and we're judging people based on behavior, not intent. Like we don't give them the courtesy to go, what's going on behind the scenes for them?
Yeah.
We just look at the behavior and we take it personally.
Yeah.
We take it personally. They don't give it to us, we take it a lot of the
Yeah.
time.
And what would be interesting to know is how often in those cases, whatever that are in the mix over here, is how often is that intent question asked?
Yeah.
That intent question asked, actually. I
Yeah.
don't think it is that often.
No, it's
No.
not enough, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all of this conversation and information that Leanne and I have talked about today, how do we make better decisions? Um, First question, and Leanne talked a lot about this when she was talking through the biases, and in the the last part that we just finished with is how do we reduce bias? The biggest and I think most simplest thing is slow down. Slow down, take a pause, take a step back, reflect, bring in your self-awareness, then go forward. And I think that's just something like that's small and that people can remember is just
Slow
slow down,
down.
slow
Yeah.
down, breathe, take a walk around the block. I mean, it's amazing onto sometimes how getting out of your environment, whether it's walking down to go, I point this way because that's where the coffee shop is from my house, walk down and go get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or walk around the block. I mean, it's amazing also how getting outside and fresh air can help you in the moment.
Yeah.
Um, because at the end of the day, bias thrives in speed, right? And another thing that we need to be cognizant of, if I can talk today, when we're making better decisions, is name the emotion. What am I feeling right now? It's like Leanna said in different episodes, name it to tame it. You know, if you can name that emotion, then you can actually take strategies to tame it down. And
Mm.
whether that is going out for a walk or doing some box breathing or just saying, is this a decision that I really have to make right now? And, sometimes it is. And sometimes it's like, well, that can wait a few days, maybe when I'm in a better headspace or I'm in a better, um, uh, like where I'm not feeling so overloaded with what's on my plate at work or at home too. Um, Also, seek disconfirming evidence, which means what might I be missing here? I always tell people, and I was in San Francisco last week and I was talking with some friends and we were talking about some stuff in the LGBTQ community, right? And I was like, a few different times I was like, check your data. Like, what are you missing here?
Mm.
You know? Um, and it's amazing if you have that self-awareness versus taking that question of check your data as I'm offended, be like, what am I missing?
Mm.
Maybe I'm not missing anything, but maybe I am missing some important elements or different point of view or different lens to look at something through. Um, and also, I think the biggest thing, and I know that this has been huge within the United States over the last several months, is that perspective of diversity. You know, and there's some people that have come to the conclusion with just different things that have happened is that diversity is that dirty word, but it's not actually. It's actually amazing because if you can ask someone who thinks differently than you, it might actually give you some of the data that you might be missing.
Yeah.
Or hey, you know what, I didn't even think about thinking through that or looking at whatever it may be through that lens. So take diversity in perspective as kind of a gold nugget in your decision making process, because awareness doesn't remove bias, but it reduces control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, because at the end of the day, is that we can't take bias out of people. So we need to set up structures and systems to reduce it. And one of those that we've talked a lot about is self-awareness.
Yeah,
Any
absolutely. The thing about diverse perspectives, don't always ask for advice from people, your go-to people. Ask from different people, especially in a workplace. I think it's so valuable because you'll learn so much about yourself. And listen, life isn't about confirming what we already know. Life is about growing, learning, stretching, right? And
right.
albeit uncomfortable, right? Like it's evolving. So yeah, I love that. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like, two different things that I've always said is you have to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
yeah, totally.
And in a relationship kind of self space, is that you're not going to be able to be in a thriving, healthy relationship until you can be happy being single.
Yeah. Oh, haven't I learned that in the last few years? Let's put that aside. We'll have a conversation about
Is it
that in
about that?
another.
Yes. So, before we go into our top takeaways, just remember that bias isn't a flaw, it's a feature,
Yeah.
right? And there's many, many ways that you can control and um, keep that feature in check. Anything else you would like to add, Leanne, before we go to top takeaways?
Listen, there's a lot more that we could add. I'm just conscious of time, Jason, and because I reckon we could have another 2 or 3 hours having a
Yes,
conversation in this space, especially around cognitive bias. It's rich.
Rich. All right. So we will move to our top takeaways.
I think this is one we will come back and revisit for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So from today's conversation, let's talk um, about decision making and bias is one, your brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. Remember that emotion drives decisions. So you can't take the emotion out. It's going to be there in some form. And thirdly, awareness creates wiser choices. And just remember that biases may be a part of that. So, sometimes as you're making choices and decisions, sometimes you just name it. Sometimes you just put it out there to say, hey, there might be some biases here from the whole team or from myself, etc. And it's amazing kind of when you name that, it's amazing on actually how better or more informed the decisions can be made.
Totally.
Okay, and then we will move to our top books and resources. Leeanne.
Yeah. The first book here, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, is a fantastic book. And he talks about the two systems. So system one thinking is fast, automatic, intuitive, right? Like it's the way that's this gut instinct that we've been talking about. And then system two is that slow, deliberate thinking where we kind of make sure that we're looking at no stone and leaving no stone unturned. And he really talks about, the impact of cognitive bias and within us and how these systems can be useful. And it's not that we can't have system one, that quick thinking, but it's about being able to also slow down and make sure that we're not making rash decisions without doing some work to make sure that we're trying to alleviate bias. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it as one to read, because the truth is, we're not as rational as we think, and that's normal, but we need to actually kind of slow ourselves down so we can be more rational where it matters most. It's not for every decision, but where it matters most, right? When there's big implications, we need to kind of fall into that system two thinking. So that's Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. The second one here is Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. And this is really a framework for making better decisions. It addresses common bias traps that we can get into. And it's, probably a very good book for leaders and business audiences, whereas Thinking Fast and Slow is kind of for everybody. So again, I'd highly recommend that as a book to investigate. And then the TED Talk is by Dan Ariely, and Ariely, and I actually thought it was quite entertaining. I watched it this week, and it talks about how we think we are in control of our own decisions, but are we really? And looking at all the different inputs that can get in the way, so to speak. So I'd highly recommend watching that TED Talk. We will put the link, as we always do, into our bio at the end, because we want to show how predictability is in the mix. And sometimes we need to kind of pause that so we can make informed decisions. So they're the resources for this week.
Awesome. And then next week, we are already at episode 19, and just a few more to go, actually, in this series of the neuroscience of being human. So next week's episode 19 will be on courage and visibility, the biology of bravery. So that's going to be a very rich discussion, and Leeanne and I are super excited about next week's conversation. And to note, for those here in the US, we will be starting at 3:30 because of daylight savings time on Wednesday, March 11th. And it will be March 12th, Sydney at 9:30 at the standard 9:30 a.m. AEDT time. And then, as always, this is the remaining part of our episodes. And we're super excited to shortly announce what our new series is going to be. So we're excited to get that up and going as well. So
Yes.
With that,
So I guess just to close off today, I'm just going to jump in, Jason.
yes, absolutely. Love it.
When you understand your brain's shortcuts, right, you gain your power back to choose powerfully. So again, double clicking, pause before you decide. That's the key takeaway for today. Pause and just ask the questions.
Absolutely. And as always, thanks for joining us here at Let's Talk today's conversation on bias and decision making. We hope that you enjoyed it, and will take some of these learnings and incorporate them into your daily life.
Yeah. So, again, as always, we hope that it sparked something new, whether it be an insight, a fresh perspective, a reminder to pause before decision making, or even just to ask yourself some questions now that might be worth exploring when you are looking at making decisions.
Exactly. And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple: to have the conversations that matter the most and to remind you that you don't have to do this complex thing called life alone. We are here to have the conversations beside you and to give you some tips and tricks to put in your toolbox to help you navigate life just a little bit easier.
And again, if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, like, subscribe, do all the things, and keep the conversation going with us.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible.
So let's talk.
Let's talk.
Real conversations.
And limitless possibilities.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everyone. You too.